The floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice President Tomiko Duggan, for your work to bring peace throughout the world. We're so happy to be again gathering for the IAPD, Interreligious Association for Peace and Development Peace Forum. We are having a special program today called Goal, Hope, and Challenges on the Korean Peninsula. Our first presenter today is Dr. Suzanne K. Schulte from the Defense Forum Foundation, which she is the president of. And she has been a leader as a Christian faith leader to be able to open up the door for many of the refugees who could come out of North Korea and come into freedom. She has been like the Harriet Tubman of Korea, honestly speaking. Just recently, she was at Liberty University with 20,000 people in attendance, and she was the main speaker along with Grace Joe and also with other refugees that came from North Korea. She is so well respected in America. She testified before Congress many times, and she also is really, really prominent in Korea, so well respected in South Korea. Suzanne, we're so happy to see you, and we look forward to hearing your presentation, which will be followed by Dr. Sullivan for commentary and Patriarch George Augustus Stallings Jr. So Dr. Suzanne K. Schulte, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. I appreciate that very kind introduction. What I thought I would do is talk very briefly about the recent report that had come out that was published by the South Korean government, and then the recent eyewitnesses that we just hosted for events in New York City and Washington, D.C., and then from what we've learned from these things, how should we be responding? So first of all, let me just say that the South Korean Ministry of Unification released publicly their 2023 North Korea Human Rights Report, which was based on interviews with 508 escapees from North Korea. It's very significant. This report is very significant because it's the first time that something's been published in recent years. There hasn't been any data or reports that have been released by the previous South Korean government under the Moon Jae-in administration, which pretty much ignored the North Korea human rights atrocities that were happening. So it's very significant. It's based on recent escapees, people that got out between 2017 and 2022. So it's new information. And tragically, it confirms what many of us feared about how bad things are in North Korea. We've been afraid that it's as bad as the Arduous March, when 3 million people died of starvation. And it's being confirmed that things are as bad as that time period. But I want to say that I think we really owe the Yoon Suk-yeol administration in South Korea a big shout out. For anybody who cares about human rights, anybody who cares about human dignity, the administration really needs to be applauded for making North Korea human rights a priority. And also Kwon Young-se, who's the South Korean unification minister, he's vowed to work substantially to improve North Korea human rights. So I want to talk briefly about the findings. There were 1,600 human rights violations that were described by these 508 people. The report is not published in English yet, but they are going to do an English translation. It is available in Korean, but it's divided into civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, vulnerable groups, and then political prisoners of war, abductees, and separated families. So those are the four main topics it covers. I want to cite a couple of the findings. Public executions in 2015 for 6 young people for watching South Korean videos and doing drugs. Public execution in 2017 for a pregnant woman for pointing at a portrait of Kim Il-sung. Public execution in 2019 for 5 people who were secretly operating an underground church in Pyongyang, the capital city. They described that women are exposed to violence at home, at school, at work, and when serving the military. In fact, a woman I hosted for a panel at the United Nations several years ago, she told me, Suzanne, the value of a woman in North Korea is the equivalent value of a fly. So this report confirms the ongoing mistreatment of the women of North Korea. They describe people being sent to political prison camps because they made a long distance phone call to South Korea, or they watched a Korean drama. So people were being sent to political prison camps. We already know about these political prison camps from other eyewitnesses that have escaped in the past, that these are places where children, women, and men are subjected to forced labor and horrific treatment. The report also confirmed the ongoing concerns about the trafficking of North Korean women. It described several women who had gone to China to try to support their families, only to end up being sold. This is ongoing and it continues. And the women in North Korean women in China are extremely vulnerable because there are no protections for them. Now, with all this darkness that has been shed by this report, I want to just cite two things that are very significant. And I want to quote directly from the report. One defector said in 2017, 12 villagers were arrested and interrogated by the State Security Bureau for missionary work in North Hamgyong province. According to the testimony, 2 were imprisoned in a political prison camp. The remaining 10 were sentenced to correctional labor and labor training on charges of receiving black money sent by a Christian group in South Korea and establishing a Christian base for missionary work. A second thing I want to read from the report. According to one defector in 2019, an organization that secretly operated a church in Pyongyang was arrested. The 5 people were publicly executed. 7 people were sent to a political prison camp. 30 people were sentenced to correctional labor, and 50 people, including their families, were forcibly deported, basically banished to a rural area. Now, the reason why I wanted to read that part of the report is, by my count, that means there were 12 people operating an underground church in North Hamgyong province and just under 100 people involved in an underground church in Pyongyang. That is amazing. I've always felt that the church was growing in North Korea because the people who got involved in this issue, people involved in the Underground Railroad, the people involved with the safe houses in China, secretly sheltering North Koreans, the people who are risking their lives to help North Korean refugees are predominantly Christians. And this is proof that despite all the attempts to wipe out Christianity in North Korea, the regime has tried to do this. They have failed. And I believe there are many secret Christians at every level of society in North Korea. And those are just 2 examples of functioning churches that were discovered and found out. So, recent eyewitnesses, we just hosted 3 amazing, brave women who escaped North Korea. And I want to give you some of my impressions of their testimonies. No matter what the regime does, brainwashing, isolation to control the population, the bond between a parent and a child remains strong. These 3 witnesses were evidence of that. 2 were mothers who saved their children, and 1 was a daughter who was saved by her mother. And I want to tell you a little about these 3 women and quote from their recent testimonies because they're an example of what's happening in North Korea and what these people face. Lee Hae-eun was arrested and tortured for 50 days when it was discovered she was making phone calls to South Korea. Now, she told me, she described herself as a smuggler. But I told her, no, you were more like Western Union, because what she was doing is she was brokering financial transactions between South Korean families who were trying to get money to their North Korean families that were starving in North Korea. So she said she was arrested because they found out that she had been making phone calls to South Korea. While she was in detention, she witnessed the terrible abuse and even the executions of many North Korean women. She said these were powerless, very ordinary North Korean women, someone's wives, someone's mothers, someone's daughters. She explained the reason she was able to withstand the abuse and the beating she received was because I knew my daughter was waiting for me at home. And for the love of my daughter, I overcame suffering, humiliation, pain, and anger. She defected with her daughter in 2019, so she was among one of the last groups to escape out of North Korea before the border closure because of COVID. That's the first woman. Second woman, Ji Hana. She said, "For my sons and myself, I yearn for freedom more than food." Mrs. G described how she went to China to try to make money to support her sons, but she was arrested and suffered torture in a Chinese detention center because it was discovered she was attending a Bible study in China, which is considered a crime. So she was repatriated to North Korea, detained, released. She escaped again. She was repatriated again, but this time she ended up in a North Korean political prison camp where she experienced and witnessed horrific human rights violations. Yet she defected again, and eventually on her 3rd try, she got to South Korea in 2015. Now get this, Ji Hana actually went back to China to rescue her 2 sons out of North Korea and
Oh.
successfully got them out in 2019.
God.
Song Mi-han, the third witness, she said that when she was 12 years old, her mother disappeared. She ended up being a child slave laborer, waiting for her mother's return, not knowing what had happened to her. She said, I quote, "At the age of 12, I was already tired of living. As a child, I engaged in manual labor for years. When people ask me what I remember about North Korea, the main things are carrying wood for hours, starving, and waiting for my mom. I was living a terrible life in North Korea with no future, no education, just working and trying to avoid starving to death. Then the most wonderful thing happened. My mom sent a broker to rescue me. She had not forgotten me. She saved money to pay for my escape." So those are the 3 witnesses that we just hosted. Now, what we can learn, what I believe we can see from their testimonies is that no matter what that regime does, it cannot break down the bond between a parent and a child. And I believe that's because we are created in God's image. And those women are just an example of the sacrifice they made for their children. So these witnesses told us some other things about North Korea that I want to share real briefly. They said that despite the draconian measures that the regime has taken to block outside information, the people of North Korea are eager to learn. They want to know about the outside world. They want to know about the concepts of freedom. So they said it's imperative that we share outside information with the people of North Korea. They said the leaflets that had been dropped into North Korea in the past, that made people understand that Kim Jong-un had killed his own half-brother, Kim Jong-nam. They said the leaflets are very effective at opening the hearts and minds of the people of North Korea. And that's why Kim Jong-un demanded to the Moon administration to stop sending those leaflets, which were being done by balloon launches. She also said, why? People in North Korea are asking why. Why is Kim Jong-un so afraid of South Korean K-pop music, South Korean soap operas? Why is he so afraid of North Koreans being in touch with people in South Korea? When the North Korean government implemented this anti-reactionary act, and this is what was leading people to being executed for listening to K-pop music or watching dramas, they wanted to know, why is he so afraid of us knowing about this outside world? They're so eager to block this information. So the 3 witnesses believe that the more the North Korean government tries to suppress the information, the more people want to know about the outside world. Some North Koreans who have access to outside information, especially people in the border regions, have said that they believe that the regime is wasting valuable resources and they're totally against these missile launches because they believe that's misspent. It's resources that could have been used to help the people. So the North Korean government utilizes the Democratic Front to spread this propaganda about anti-capitalism sentiment. But they said most North Koreans already know that is not, that they're just spreading lies. And when this is interesting, they said when Kim Jong-un introduced his daughter, she's been in the press a lot lately. They said when Kim Jong-un introduced Kim Ju-ae to the public for the first time, the reaction from North Korean women was, they were very unhappy because she got to grow her hair as long as she wants, whereas North Korean women are restricted on how they have their hairstyle and what clothes they wear. They also said that people are not welcoming of this Bakdu line, the Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, that they're rejecting this family dictatorship. The 3 witnesses also felt that the reason why they were showing the daughter so much, Kim Jong-un has been showing having pictures with his daughter, having his daughter go to military parades. They think he's trying to show himself as a father figure, but they don't think that the daughter would be the heir apparent. So to wrap up, what should we be doing in response to this kind of information? The report we got from the South Korean government and the reports we're getting from North Korean people. I'm a big believer in prayer and fasting, and we're going to be doing it April 28th. We're going to call on people all over the world and to pray and fast for North Korea, and we're going to have a prayer service that evening online with North Korean defectors who've become pastors. So I'm a big believer in that. There's a organization called the Esther Prayer Movement. They've been doing standing up prayers all over the world, modeled after what happened at that Leipzig church in East Germany that many think is the reason why the Berlin Wall came down, because they were doing steadfast prayers for Germany's freedom. The second thing is to be sure to continue to raise the issue of these refugees in China. we have to continue the pressure to get those refugees that are in China now to be able to have safe passage to South Korea. And then finally, I think really important is to support and encourage the North Korean defectors in their work. They're the ones leading the information campaign. And one partnership I know you guys are familiar with, I've talked about it before, but we have a radio program called Free North Korea Radio. We broadcast every morning and every evening into North Korea. And it's a partnership between freedom-loving Americans and North Korean escapees that ensures people are getting information in North Korea. We know the elites have to listen to it. So that's just one example of a partnership, but I think we need to get information in by radio, but by land, by sea, and by air. There's a new technique the North Korean defectors have developed. It's called a water balloon. The water balloon floats on the Yellow Sea into North Hamgyong province, and the water balloons have a picture of Kim Jong-un's face on it, so the soldiers can't fire on it. They can't interfere with the balloon. And they're sending in rice, flash drives, Bibles, leaflets of information, US $1 bills to use in the markets. And the sad thing is the South Koreans passed a law banning all these activities, but the North Korean defectors have never stopped doing them because the law is unconstitutional. And even Kwang Young-se, I cited him earlier, the unification minister, has said this is unconstitutional. It interferes with South Korea's constitution and their international treaty obligations to be able to have the free flow of information in North Korea. And that's absolutely critical that we continue that engagement campaign. So with that, I will just wrap up, but I thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you.
Dr. Schulte, thank you so much again. Every time you present, wherever I've heard you, and especially on these programs, your knowledge is so specific and so deep. We were so blessed to have Grace Joe as a guest speaker. It was so shocking how many times she escaped to China and actually was sent back to North Korea, which is a horrific fate. And again, she shared with us the prison she was held in, the torture, and she would still escape again and help other family members get out. It's very deeply moving. We would like to join that prayer on April 28th, and we want to encourage our whole worldwide interreligious association for peace and development to do the same in every country. That's a wonderful opportunity. Prayer does change things. And I really hope this current administration is not like the past, because the past administration thought that by agreeing to not allow those balloons to fly anymore, that would really help in negotiations. It didn't change anything. All it did was keep the people of the North Korea in the dark. So thank you for your leadership and all you're doing. And we had the opportunity to meet your husband, who's an outstanding patriot for America. And we're really looking forward to the next opportunity when we can work together even further. But April 28th, we will really put the word out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Thomas, thank you. Dr. Thomas Selliver is president of the Professors World Peace Academy International. Dr. Selliver is also the global co-coordinator for the International Association for Academicians for Peace, which is another association of the Universal Peace Federation. He previously served as president of the Sunhak UP Graduate University outside of Seoul, South Korea. He holds a doctorate in comparative religion and East Asian philosophy from Harvard University. Dr. Selliver's current research focus is on the values of human relatedness and promoting a society of interdependence and mutual prosperity. Dr. Thomas Selliver, welcome. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. It's a pleasure to be here and in such an auspicious company. Let me say that. In this season of Eastertide, which this year also marks Passover and the holy month of Ramadan, it's very appropriate to talk together about the spiritual dimensions of peace building and the spiritual dimensions of what will lead us forward, as we've just heard. So it's an honor for me to participate with you in today's program. anyway, let me say, someone may ask why, when the Russia-Ukraine war is raging, why we're talking about the Korean Peninsula. And indeed, I think we've just heard a tremendously persuasive case for that. I would just add that a model of peace building would be very helpful and urgently needed. And so I want to talk a little bit about the personal summit meeting between our UPF founders, Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Jahan Moon, with Chairman Kim Il-sung in 1991, because I think it represents a cornerstone, and there are things that we can learn from it in order to advance a peace process. So let me start with that, if I may, just a moment. Okay. So my topic is going to talk about Confucian patterns in this summit event, because I think there's something that we can learn from it. So today I want to talk about 5 aspects of the personal summit meeting, which demonstrate long-standing Confucian spiritual and practical principles. Indeed, there's a distinctly Confucian approach to political action, referred to by sociologist Sung Joon Kim as Confucian Moralpolitik, by a zeal to subordinate politics to moral imperatives. And this is a kind of traditional thing going back a long way. But I think that this 1991 personal summit meeting is a shining example of successful Confucian Moralpolitik in action, powered by intense godly devotion. So the first point is the benevolent person has no enemies. This point characterizes the way that Reverend and Mrs. Moon overcame the history of enemy feeling towards Chairman Kim Il-sung, making the personal summit both possible and productive. By 1991, Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Chairman Kim Il-sung were well-established adversaries. The deep background of this lay in Reverend Moon's suffering of persecution and imprisonment at the hands of the North Korean government in the 1950s. Reverend Moon himself explains, "I spent nearly 3 years in a communist concentration camp under the North Korean dictatorship of Kim Il-sung. They sent me there to die, but I survived and eventually was freed by the United Nations forces." Reverend Moon, for his part, was a leading opponent of communist ideology and of Kim Il-sung's regime in particular. At the huge World Rally for Korean Freedom in 1975, he had denounced Kim Il-sung, not only in the name of the Korean people and of all of humanity, but also in the name of God. News that Kim Il-sung was plotting Reverend Moon's assassination was received from the American FBI. Given all this background, Mrs. Moon explained, "When you think about it, my visiting North Korea with my husband and meeting with Chairman Kim Il-sung was an exceptionally high-risk endeavor. Chairman Kim was truly an adversary, but Reverend and Mrs. Moon practiced the teaching of the Confucian philosophers, as well as of Jesus, about transcending enmity." As Reverend Moon explains, in true love, there's no concept of struggle. There's only the heart of compassion. Mrs. Moon adds, "Before we set foot in North Korea, we had to forgive Kim Il-sung, whose regime had hurt the nation and world, not to mention our extended family and ourselves. With that heart, I pledged to forgive my enemy. I did not pray for our safe return from North Korea." On the foundation of intense prayer and life-risking devotion, the couple was able to overcome all enmity through true love. The second point is a key Confucian text teaching about filial piety and younger brotherly respect as the root of benevolence. Here, I want to emphasize that the language, the rituals, and the attitudes of brotherliness created an atmosphere in which this personal summit meeting could realize new heavenly possibilities. At the personal summit meeting, Reverend Moon, who was 7 years younger than President Kim Il-sung, tells us, "I had to take the position of younger brother and treat Kim Il-sung as an older brother whom I had not seen for 40 years. Only then was it possible for our conversation to be cheerful without any feeling of enmity, allowing for me to give him some advice. Mr. President, I said, you are older than me, so you are like my older brother. And indeed, this dynamic is still very much a part of Korean society. So he responded, President Moon, from now let's refer to each other as older brother and younger brother, and he grasped my hand tightly. Indeed, the actual meeting between Reverend Moon and Kim Il-sung went beyond even those Confucian-inspired expectations. They gave one another a big bear hug, and during the 1.5-hour conference, Reverend Moon was a model of cordiality and decorum. The theme of brotherliness, of course, also appears in the story of Jacob and Esau in the Jewish and Christian biblical tradition. The Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon both described their encounter with Chairman Kim as the restoration of the elder brother's position, modeled on the successful reconciliation of Jacob and Esau, according to Genesis chapter 33, verses 10 and 11. Mrs. Moon recalls, our visit was similar to the story of the Bible, of when Jacob impressed his brother Esau, who had intended to kill him. Through his indescribable hardships, wisdom, and devotion, Jacob moved his brother's heart to such an extent that they finally were able to make peace with one another. My husband and I similarly concluded our conference with Kim Il-sung of North Korea with successful reconciliation. Part of the reason, we can say, for this success was because the brotherly model, according to Confucian tradition, was familiar to both of them, more deeply embedded, we might say, in Korean culture than either the respective ideologies of North or South. The third one is focusing on harmony and the role of ritual with respect to harmony. Seeking harmony through ritual describes the goal of harmony and the importance of ritual in order to get there. The overarching imperative to value harmony cannot be successfully carried out without some kind of ritual procedure, some kind of protocols that can regenerate an atmosphere of harmony. So, avoiding confrontational rhetoric in this particular setting, the spirit of harmony was able to flow. During the personal summit, Reverend and Mrs. Moon conducted themselves with dignity, politeness, while staying awake every night with heartfelt prayer. Their fervent love filled the ritual with generative power. The fourth point we can call harmony without conformity. In speaking about harmony, Confucius offered a stark contrast. Noble people can harmonize without conformity, without agreement. Petty people cannot be harmonious even if they agree with each other. This means that conformity of views is not necessary and is no guarantee of harmonious success. Indeed, false attempts at conformity undermine the very possibility of genuine harmony. So at the outset of the personal summit process, Reverend Moon spoke boldly about the limits of North Korean Juche thought and the necessity of adopting a God-centered point of view. He spoke out with great candor and forcefulness because, he said, it's the right thing to do, no matter what happened. The North Korean government leaders and even the unification participants were shocked and scared about what was going to happen next. However, Chairman Kim Il-sung was intrigued and insisted on meeting the Reverend Moon in person. At the personal summit, the views of Reverend Moon and Chairman Kim were certainly conflicting, if not completely opposed. And Kim Il-sung didn't necessarily change his views, but rather a new possibility opened, which transcended his views. Reverend Moon said it seemed like the winner or loser was going to be decided in a final showdown by who was bolder. And indeed, that was the way in which he won. By his audacity and by his firm faith and by the foundation that he brought with him. Lastly, I would say another Confucian principle is results are with heaven. The point is not focusing on instrumental goals or immediate results, but rather doing what is right and what is good, leaving the results to heaven's providence. In the event, the harmonious reconciliation led to several new initiatives, as Reverend Moon explains. I made agreements with then President Kim regarding separated families, North-South economic cooperation, development of Mount Kungang, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and working toward North-South Summit Conference. So indeed, these are the still key points in the hope for a positive development on North-South relations. And these pledges began to bear fruit right away in terms of high-level meetings that happened just afterwards. Now, this is February 1992. It's still the case today that this personal summit of 1991 is recognized as a contribution to North-South relations on the part of the North, but not on the part of the South so far. So the question is, what is the lasting legacy here? What is the ongoing impact, we might ask? Well, one of the evidences of the possibility of ongoing impact is that still today, the North Korean regime under Kim Jong-un sends yearly condolences to the Moon family on the anniversary of Reverend Sun Myung Moon's passing. So this is from several years ago, and the bouquet on the right came just this past summer on the 10th anniversary of Reverend Moon's passing, expressing the hope that Dr. Hak Jahan Moon and the bereaved family will carry on the will and legacy of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. When that sentiment is shared in the South, then heavenly unified Korea will be much closer. We often hear talk in political terms about peace through strength, but in many ways, the most important strength is spiritual strength in terms of transcendent motivation, perseverance, and life-risking determination. We could also say strength through peace. Learning from the 1991 Personal Summit, we today ought to vigorously pursue interreligious peace-building activities and build up moral strength to resist conflict-based thinking. As in the Personal Summit, this peace-building activity will require preparation, both short-term and long-term. UPF and its pillar associations are a coalition of peace builders. At the heart of all UPF programming concerning the Korean situation is the commitment to peaceful resolution of conflict on the peninsula. When we think of Mrs. Moon as Mother of Peace, we recognize that all of the initiatives that she is leading worldwide are based on the principles of peace building, namely interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. So internal preparation means being prayed up and ready for action. Externally means commitment to managing forms of confrontation in order to allow for new developments. In terms of motivation, peace building on the Korean Peninsula today, what we sometimes call heavenly unified Korea, Shin-Tongil Hanguk, is the same as in the Personal Summit in 1991. It can never proceed on the basis of enmity or a desire for vindication or revenge. In spite of the violent history and the presence of nuclear weapons in the North, the only attitude which will allow heaven to work successfully is one of true parental love. One of the implications of the Moon-Kim Personal Summit for peace building today is that the South stands in the younger brother position with respect to the North. After decades of hard work, the South has achieved both economic prosperity and a vibrant form of political democracy. Korean Christian communities, for whom the biblical paradigm of Jacob and Esau has deep resonance, the two brothers and what's the responsibility of the younger brother, may have the best foundation to understand the implications of this paradigm for what the South needs to do now. International Christians and others can be of help in drawing out the implications of this paradigm. Then what can other religious and civic leaders do today? First, we can be witnesses to the soft power of a spiritually grounded cause, looking beyond self-interest and even national self-interest. We can guide parishioners and congregation members to pray and to engage in peace-building activities, and also write to their elected representatives. We need a new formula for peace, one that insists on freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. Also important is to develop a kind of rhetoric about this issue that can garner recognition and support by political leaders in the United States on both sides of the aisle. In the US, as well as in Korea, ritually polite language, which treats others with dignity, can go a long way toward advancing successful peace formulas. In conclusion, the Confucian approaches from Reverend and Mrs. Moon's Breakthrough Personal Summit with Chairman Kim Il-sung are in line with the UPF ideals of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. From the viewpoint of this language, these ideals and principles can be articulated in a way that forms a common base with the moral commitments of widely different elements of the political spectrum. In closing, I'd like to offer the following suggestions for peace building on the Korean Peninsula today, based on the cornerstone of the summit. First, interdependence. Governments alone cannot achieve reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula without the role of civil society in opening the way for peace. The UPF founders came to that personal summit as religious leaders on the foundation of tremendous work in civil society and also economic endeavors, both in Korea and throughout the world. So interdependence is the first principle. Second, mutual prosperity based on the family model. Brotherly attitudes and sisterly and appropriate ritual are vital for creating the new kind of heavenly atmosphere in the midst of what could be just a meeting of adversaries. This is the main reason why civil society mediation can and ought to smooth the way for intergovernmental diplomacy. Then third, universal values. The cooperative efforts of many religious people and organizations are needed for the peace and reconciliation process to proceed. As Dr. Hak Jahan Moon explains, unification of the Korean Peninsula will not be brought about solely by political negotiations or commercial trade. Unification is only possible by means of the fortune of heaven together with God's true love. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you today, and I look forward to our discussion. 대단히 감사합니다. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. I really appreciate your insights and all of the detailed work that you have done to put together that narrative about what happened in North Korea. And we saw with our own eyes the fact that there has been a positive, ongoing dialogue between our UPF organization, Mother Moon, and Kim Jong-un. And he had also shared that he received that from his father, Kim Jong-il, and he received it from his father, Kim Il-sung. One of the deepest struggles of Father and Mother Moon when they were preparing to go to North Korea is that how can we embrace this person who has caused so much suffering to humanity, particularly the Korean people, but also the world. And in her memoir, Mother of Peace, which I highly recommend, she goes through the details of how they went to Hawaii to prepare for that trip. And they prayed for days to remove every feeling of anger and accusation, condemnation, and the wanting of the judgment of God to exercise its full power. And instead, they felt they had to pray and let go of that, or otherwise they could not represent God's internal holy spirit, the love of Jesus that has the possibility to transform any human being. That's why we never can underestimate, like what Dr. Schulte does, speaking truth to power with love. And therefore, there is an ongoing relationship. And we're very, very honored to receive that presentation today. Our next speaker is Patriarch George Augustus Stallings Jr., my colleague and friend for many, many years. He's been to Korea many, many times and prayed at the DMZ. And we have had so many experiences of bringing religious leaders there, because the number one thing that he knows is that the vision of UPF, the IAPD, the vision of that Jesus gave Father and Mother Moon, is that religious leaders, people of faith, must lead the way. And I count you, Dr. Sullivan, as a person of faith, that is a scholar. But people of faith, but particularly the faith leaders, have to lead the way to bring this reconciliation, to dissolve that 38th parallel, so that the Korean people can become one again. Archbishop Stallings is very dear to Father and Mother Moon. He was one of the first clergy and one of the founding clergy of the American Clergy Leadership Conference, and also the World Christian Leadership Conference, and has done a tremendous work. He's the patriarch of the African American Catholic congregation. He just installed Bishop Milton as his successor to be overseeing the day-to-day management of Imani Temple and the African American Catholic congregation. He is a great man of God, educated in Rome. He's a Roman Catholic, and felt called by God to become independent. I'd like to welcome at this time Patriarch George Augustus Stallings Jr.
Thank you so much, my beloved and esteemed brother and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Michael William Jenkins, and to be a part of this outstanding panel of presenters. I always love listening to Dr. Suzanne Schulte, and even in her absence on this platform, I have quoted some of the things she has shared with us. And of course, Dr. Thomas Sullivan is just has a monumental mind, rich in erudition. He's a scholar par excellence. And all I felt that I needed to say after listening to Doctors Schulte and Sullivan was to say, amen, Jew, hallelujah, thank you, Lord, because they hit all of the buttons and blew all of the trumpets in regards to this effort to work, of course, the reunification of North and South Korea, and particularly focusing on our theme today, the goals, hope, and challenges for the Korean Peninsula, the land of the morning calm. Every time I think of the land of the morning calm, my heart aches and pines for the people of Korea who are related to each other, the same blood, the same language, the same culture, to be together as one. That was the Creator's intention. The divine power of God from the beginning was that we would become one, that we would be a visible and tangible manifestation reflecting the presence of the Spirit of the invisible God dwelling within each and every one of us. Dr. Schulte says we were created in the image of God. Yes, all of us are created in the divine image and likeness of God, and that we not only bear that same spiritual root, but we have that same spiritual DNA, if you will. We all are brothers and sisters, one united family under God. I think of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that were delivered from the Birmingham jail back in the 16th of April, 1963, when he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. What may be going on the Korean Peninsula and affecting our brothers and sisters on that peninsula is affecting them. It's affecting them directly, but it's also affecting all of us indirectly. When you realize that Korean War began in 1950 and ended in 1953, which this year we commemorate the 70th anniversary. We know that Dr. Schulte wasn't even born then, but that commemorates that that the ending of that war, we realize that it is a pressing issue that needs to remain on, or needs to be placed on the front burner of our politics, our religion, our government, our efforts to bring a resolution to that conflict. Because I am convinced that once that conflict ends there, we're going to see the conflict end in the Middle East. We're going to see it end between Russia and Ukraine. We're going to see an age-old conflict will be the catalyst that will create peace in other lands. There's no question about it that the Reverend Dr. Sum Young Moon and his beloved wife, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, are the most, in my own estimation, at least I can speak from my vantage point, and I think some of you will resonate with that viewpoint, that they are in the best position, particularly Father Moon in the spirit world now, and Mother Moon, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, as the Mother of Peace, working here on earth in tandem with the spirit world, are the best agents, are the best conduits to break this bond, break the chains that are preventing this unity from taking place, this peace being restored on that peninsula. I have been a witness, and I heard Dr. Sullivan mention that word, we are witnesses. I am a witness to what is happening in that country, time and time again, over 4 dozen times, visiting there since the year 2001, and connecting with the energy of the people of South Korea, that the longing desire that they hold in their hearts is for the reunification of that peninsula. And I believe with all my heart, and I'm a man of faith, I love the fact that both Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Schulte talked about faith. Faith is going to, and what we heard from Mother Moon, faith is going to be that ingredient. It's going to be that main force that's going to bring about that reunification, because we've seen what has happened over the past 70 years, yet we still have maintained hope that it is possible for the reunification of the Korean people, to be one people. There are multi-pronged approaches to this whole effort. You got the hardcore diplomacy with government and military intervention, and then there's that diplomacy that we are engaged in, I think, in our efforts as, soft power diplomacy. We cannot engage actively in any diplomatic or governmental intervention in this matter. We'd end up going to jail as Americans if we did that. But we can bring something to the table that government cannot bring, as Dr. Jenkins said, that military intervention cannot. We can bring our faith. I believe, as has been expressed, that prayer changes things. But I think there's something even greater than that. Prayer changes people, so that people can change things, because we are God's agents. We are God's ambassadors. We are God's conduit. God, the invisible God, works through us, through mortal flesh, to bring about resolution. And so Dr. Sullivan talked about, we are in a special season right now, and it correlates with what Dr. Schulte said about prayer and fasting on this April 28th, this massive worldwide effort to engage in prayer and fasting, because that's going to help to break the yoke. But Dr. Sullivan talked about, we are in that season where the Jewish community is still celebrating Passover. It ends on Thursday, April 13th. The Muslims have been engaged in Ramadan, and that's a whole 1 month period of prayer and fasting and doing charitable works. And we as Christians just came out of Holy Week. We're in Easter week now, that the whole world is teeming with this spiritual energy coming together at this one particular time. So I don't know who was the one, Dr. Schulte, who said that there should be this prayer and fasting on April 28th, but it could not have been more providentially scheduled than in the very month where the two largest religions in the world, Christianity and Islam, along with Judaism, with its influence on many different levels, would say it's time for us as a world community, as brothers and sisters, one universal family under God, to engage in a period of prayer and fasting. Because in the end, when all is said and done, it is going to be our faith that will allow us to persevere through this entire period of time as we assiduously do everything in our collective and individual energies to make this thing happen, to bring about the reunification. Last thing, as a member of the American Clergy Leadership Conference, and now as the USA Chairman of the Interreligious Association of Peace and Development, I am personally committed to do all in my power to touch my members, my parishioners, to reach out to other clergy in the United States, to begin to speak more forcefully about this reunification effort, and to encourage us, as Dr. Sullivan mentioned, to write to our congressmen and congresswomen, to write to our elected officials, to say that this is a concern that we have, and we want to see it on the agenda more than it has been. So together, this multi-pronged approach is going to really shake the foundation. And because Father and Mother Moon always receive responses from North Korea, whenever on True Mother's birthday, True Parents' birthday, who did they receive a bouquet of flowers from? Who did they contact in South Korea rather than anyone else? It was Father and Mother Moon. And sending flowers. Kim Jong-un every year he sends a beautiful bouquet of flowers, a whole arrangement of flowers, because there's something there artistically that has touched him that means that the real breakthrough is going to be when we can get more deeply into Kim Jong-un's heart and bring about this effort to say, hey, my greatest contribution will not be firing missiles, scaring folks, but my greatest contribution is when I will be self-giving, when I will just be selfless in my desire to see all of Koreans united, and just simply back down a bit and say, what will make me more, what will make me more of a hero and make me more, which will place me in the Parthenon of greatest leaders in the world, is when I be the one who said it's time for the Korean people to come back together. So thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you, Dr. Schulte. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan, for spectacular presentations. And I'm more encouraged now than ever after listening to you to keep on marching until victory, until reunification is won. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop Stallings. God bless. EJ, if you could bring all four of us back on the screen together with Dr. Sullivan. Yes, very good. Thank you. So our time has been well spent, but we do want to take just a moment to have a couple of reflections from our panel. Also, Dr. Schulte, there's a request that we get the information on the prayer meeting on April 28th. If you could send that to Tomiko, or, she'll get it out to everybody.
Will do.
So, Archbishop, thank you for your spiritual vision and clarity. We do have to come together. We see the North-South Korea situation as central to the whole world situation, more central than any other part of the world, because it's the final step of the conflict between communism and the Christian-based, faith-based democracy and freedom. The other showdowns are there and all over the world, and they're all important, they're all terrible, but this is the epicenter because America's there, which represents, the fruits of Christianity. And then you have the ROK, DPRK, China, Russia, and finally you have Japan. It's quite a shocking lineup, actually, that the world powers are all gathered around this peninsula. So, Suzanne, what can we do that you would recommend we do to help the refugees that we can do directly to support your work and reach them? Because the one thing we have seen is information is the most powerful weapon. And when they get it, they can have the courage and the strength to change their family situation. So what do you recommend?
Well, I think raising the issue, as you, I think Reverend Stallings talked about contacting our own elected officials, but continuing to encourage that interaction with China that Xi Jinping should allow these families safe passage to South Korea. There's nothing to be gained by forcing them back to North Korea. And I think that we have to just keep that at the forefront. It has happened in the past where China has allowed large numbers of North Korean refugees to go to South Korea, especially when the Kim regime has been provocative in testing missiles. And that has happened in the past because it's destabilizing for China to have this going on. So I think this is a really important time right now because the border is still closed. There is some concern that the border may open soon, and then the pressure will be on to try to force them back to North Korea. So I think it's just keeping the focus on that, because we do know this, something very encouraging. We do know that there has been kindness shown by some of the Chinese officials in where these North Koreans are detained, because they have some compassion on them, because they know they weren't breaking the law in China. They may have crossed the border illegally, but they were trying to get to South Korea. And so we've heard stories of kindness that's been shown by some of the Chinese. So I think keeping that at the forefront, making sure that we don't take our eyes off that. And then also, there was a family that was flown directly from directly from China to South Korea back in the end of 2021, and the Chinese allowed that family safe passage. So I think it can happen. And then again, just partnering with the North Korean defectors, they know how to package stuff. They know what the message should be, but they need us to be there with them to support them and help them. And I do want to mention one thing too. One of the most popular programs that we have on Free North Korea Radio, and this fits in with everything you all have been talking about, that is we go to members of Congress. And we say, what would you say to the North Korean people if you had a chance to tell them something? What would you say? And we have Democrats and Republicans that participate in this program. We care about you. We care about you. We want you to have food. We want you to have, we want you to have the prosperity that South Korea and America has. We're not your enemy. We're not occupying South Korea. We're not Yankee imperialist wolves, and just giving their heartfelt sentiments to people in North Korea. And that program's become very popular. We do it twice a year. But
great. Fantastic. Well, we certainly want to participate in that also. Dr. Celeber, one thing that's very moving is to hear about the underground churches in North Korea. We know they're there. We don't know the scope and size, and we can't reveal anything about them. But the point is that they are there. And it was very interesting because that's where Mother Moon came from. She was in an underground church when communism took over North Korea. And they were very, very spirit-filled, spirit-led Pentecostal churches. And Father Moon's church also, they weren't together then. But his church also was spirit-filled. He came out of the Presbyterian tradition, like most Koreans are Presbyterian or Methodist. But Mother Moon was there with the Inside the Womb church, it was called, because the pastor, Ho Ho Ben, would have her every time she'd get a revelation about Jesus coming, she'd have a contraction like she's going to have a baby. So they called it the Inside the Womb church, or Inside the Belly church. So Dr. Celeber, what do you see as what we can do academically to help the Christians in North Korea be liberated?
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. That's a very huge question. And I guess one of the concerns that I have is for also the younger generation in the South, whether their sense of the urgency of the North-South reconciliation, whether the sense of the urgency of the plight of their brothers and sisters in the North, whether their sense of it is as keen as their parents, or whether there's just a window right now where young people in Korea, many, are getting caught up in the materialistic dreams that we've helped to foster. And so I think that one of the questions is whether the churches in the South are really thinking and working toward a change in the whole setup in Korea. So just one other thing, China also has underground churches, and you don't get any statistics about how big that movement is. And but it's certainly vibrant and certainly growing. And so Dr. Schulte mentioned a little bit of kindness shown. The question of the roots of kindness, this is my Confucian sense of it. That kindness comes from heaven. And that's the tradition. And the Communist Party is trying to deny that point, but it's still true. So kindness, when it's shown, is a reflection of a kind of spirituality there. So when I hear that story, that little bit, then I feel there's some hope there. So there are Christians in China, just as there are serious Christians in the south of Korea and underground Christians in the north. And so that's got to be the foundation. It's not a political deal, and it's not even for trade. It's really a breakthrough, a peace-building breakthrough that can have influence for surrounding in the world. So I think the point of people of faith working together, praying together, is really key. And so I want to emphasize that, just as Patriarch Stallings mentioned, and as Dr. Schulte also mentioned. This is IAPD. This is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, Dr. Sullivan, as one who speaks Chinese and writes and reads Chinese, your value is great. It's so great. And you also were a Presbyterian pastor in Canada, and we just think the world of you. I do believe that a Christian revolution has to occur. Those people are really living on the cutting edge of life or death faith. And Archbishop, you've met many Christians. You met some of the defectors that came out of North Korea. We had them in our programs, and they're just outstanding people. They turn to Christianity quite rapidly. It's a beautiful thing. But as a Christian pastor, what can we do to get more pastors really focused on this time? Because it's like Dr. Schulte said, it's really a very sensitive time, because with enough pressure on, and we can't do this without China's support, without China's at least allowing people to come through China or that kind of thing. So, how can pastors be encouraged to communicate with their congressmen and call for Xi Jinping to open up for North Korea, and even call for Kim Jong-un to meet Mother Moon soon? He's asked for that, actually.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that, Archbishop?
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And my first response would be as a segue to what Dr. Sullivan said about the young people in South Korea. Just how sensitive are they aware? What is their sensitivity to that conflict between North and South Korea? And I think that those young Koreans in South Korea are just as much aware of that conflict as young African Americans are aware of the civil rights struggle. They just don't seem to get it. They don't seem to have any idea, because they haven't lived through that experience. When you haven't lived through the hardship, the conflict, when you have not literally witnessed the ripping apart of families who are, in the North and in the South, and you have years behind you where that has not really affected your generation, it's very difficult to motivate the masses to say, hey, young people, this really rests in your hands. And Dr. Sullivan is right. The population is aging, that experience that actually lived through this conflict. If we said it ended 70 years ago, that I know a lot of South Koreans who are in their 80s and 90s, approaching 100, and they are well aware of the struggle, but somehow it hasn't captured the imagination of young people. And it's the same thing, therefore, with these Christian ministers. It's talking about America, being a part of the American, Dr. Jenkins, you and I being a part of the American Clergy Leadership Conference, making countless annual visits to the land of the morning calm, to South Korea. And we have been to the 38th parallel dozens of times. And yet while there is a sense of the separation between the two peoples, or between the two peoples of one blood, of one culture, one nationality, unless you have actually deeply experienced the results of that kind of alienation or separation, it's kind of hard to keep the issue on the front burner. So my effort in leadership, as well as yours, Dr. Jenkins, and what Dr. Schulte is doing in her sphere of activities, and Dr. Sullivan and what he's doing, particularly on the academic catechetical level of what this conflict is all about, is that we're going to have to start talking more about what's going on in North and South Korea. We're going to have these kinds of presentations for American clergy, even if we just do the video and send it to them as a gift to them, that I would guarantee you that 99 and 44, 100% of American ministers are not thinking about this conflict that is going on that peninsula. We are the ones who are all caught up in it. I mean, we're filled to the brim with a concern about what is going on the Korean Peninsula. But most ministers, people in the pew as well, they don't have the foggiest idea. They don't even probably realize that many of them don't even realize the impact that that division, that conflict has caused. So the more we speak about this, the more hopefully we will, gain the attention of a remnant, if we can even call it that, a remnant of those who will support us in this cause. So let's, as Jesse Jackson says, let's keep hope alive and pray that somehow we can, and of course, last thing, if something really happens on the world scene that we don't want to see happen, that may be what will trigger a greater concern of all, especially men and women of faith, to become really proactive and do something and make some noise about this.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. We thank you, Dr. Schulte, Dr. Sullivan, and Archbishop Stallings. I'd like to turn this back over to the esteemed Vice President of UPF USA, Ms. Tomiko Duggan. Thank you, Tomiko.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. This is really, you can see the comment coming from chat box. This is truly, as I mentioned, that the speakers, distinguished speakers, can bring in their insightful and wisdom based on the experiences. Thank you so much, Dr. Schulte. Please take care of your health.
Thank you.
And Dr. Sullivan, thank you so much. You described in the way we have heard Reverend and Mrs. Moon's visit to North Korea. However, the way you described again make it much more what universally we should understand what we can bring to reconciliation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all audience who are with us. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless. Yes.
Keep hope alive.
Yes, thank you so much. Our chairman. Yes, thank you so much.
Always. My
yes,
pleasure.
always. Yeah, thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much.
Dr.
Yeah.
Schulte, we will miss you in Korea, but
I
we'll look forward
know.
to the next time. We're really honored to meet your husband at the International Religious Freedom Summit.
That was
and
really
he's a
something.
wonderful
That was something.
person. Yes.
Thank you.
So we're praying
Thank
for you, and we'll have a very significant trip this time. Time is of the essence. Thank you, Archbishop, and
My
thank you,
pleasure. My
Dr.
pleasure.
Sullivan. Nice to see you. That was beautiful. Please.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yes.
And I hope that everyone saw the comments that there are persons who want to receive the presentations of Dr. Schulte and Dr. Sullivan. So please make those available. And of course, they can always go back and look at the video here. They can look at the program again and share this link, please. Share this link with others who were not with us on this
Absolutely.
platform. Please do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so
It's
much.
a critical issue that we must keep on the front burner. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you.
All right.
Quality program all the way. Thank you. God bless.
Stellar,
Yes.
stellar program. Thank you. God bless.